NASA's Jupiter-exploring Juno spacecraft has captured its most detailed image of the ice-covered, ocean-bearing moon called Europa. Scientists believe it is one of the likeliest places in the solar system to host extraterrestrial life. For more, I'm now joined by astrophysicist and cosmologist at ANU, Brad Tucker. Brad, good afternoon. What do these images tell us?
Yeah, look, this close-up is only about 300 or so kilometers from the surface, it's actually closer than the International Space Station orbits the Earth. So this is a fairly close shave. They saw details of some of the cracks in the ice sheets. They also saw some quite interesting darker planes in the ice sheets that you're kind of seeing here, almost like some people think it almost looks like a musical note in kind of the bottom right. So almost like there's kind of some sort of ice impact or maybe a ice lake, kind of that we see in Antarctica. So a lot of this is showing kind of the scale of the features, the nature of the features, and what's happening on the ice and potentially underneath the ice, because that's the key, as you said here. We think this giant ice moon has oceans underneath, and that some of these oceans are causing some of these features. And so this is kind of showing where is the best likelihood for activity underneath the surface, because those are the places that we're going to pinpoint for looking for potential life down the road, where it's really active and more recent kind of formations rather than things that were billions of years ago. We want those more recent things where it's likely that there's potentially life, or at least geology happening that could trigger or has triggered life.
Well, anything will do. We're still looking for that,
That's right.
Any life anywhere. So maybe
Exactly.
one day we'll have that. Now, one of the planets, Brad, Uranus, it's a bit different to the rest of them. It's rotating on its side. Now, why is that? We now have a potential explanation.
Yeah, look, Uranus has always been this weird planet, because he said it's rotating on its side and it's going backwards. So it's kind of going the opposite angle all the other planets do. Now, there's been a lot of ideas that have been put forth, but none of them have been that satisfactory, because ultimately the idea of either maybe Uranus got smacked, collided in by a dwarf planet or a moon, doesn't explain why it's still similar in every other way to Neptune. So Neptune and Uranus are almost identical, except the way the planets move. Now a new model has shown that maybe it's because of actually moons drifting away. So we know moons drifting away is very common for planets. Our moon is moving away about 4 centimeters per year, and that slightly changes the way the planet moves. It's slowing down our rotation. Jupiter does this, so does Saturn. And they showed that even a somewhat, smaller moon, something about a third the size of our moon, drifting away, would kind of yank a little bit on Uranus, causing it to flip over and therefore spin on its side. And this is quite an important thing, because we know this happens. We're seeing it kind of happening in Jupiter. We've measured it happening in our moon. And it also would solve the problems of other things that would be missing if a giant collision happened. So it could be a great discovery into a fairly common process, and that is moons moving around a planet and drifting away.
Well, there you go. A fascinating explanation, and at least we know now why. Brad, a space weather forecasting centre has been inaugurated in Adelaide to help Australia's space industry prepare for space weather events. So what will the centre do?
So look, the Bureau of Meteorology has been doing this for quite a while, but they've eventually, as you said, formally opened this centre to bring a bigger focus of space weather forecasting. So just as we forecast weather here on Earth, and that can tell us, how to be prepared. Is it going to rain? Is it going to be sunny? Is it going to flood or have those storms in space? This is about saying when these solar storms erupt, and this happens quite often on the sun, is it going to hit the Earth? Is it going to affect infrastructure on the ground in Australia or Australian infrastructure in space? And this is the key. It's focusing on Australian-based assets, because space weather is a big deal. We have seen solar storms that have disrupted GPS networks. Bigger storms can disrupt other satellite networks like internet, even banking, communications. And if it's really big, it can affect actually electrical systems on the Earth. So this is really saying this is becoming a bigger thing. And as space becomes a bigger part of our role, Australia needs a dedicated center just to monitor this. So it's a really important step and a good initiative by the federal government to say, look, we can't ignore this. We're growing more and more dependent now, and we can't rely on overseas partners to do the forecasting and look out for Australia. We need to do it in-house.
Yeah, it's good for Australia, as we know, expanding in the space industry. So it's good to have something local like that, no doubt. Now, Brad, the SpaceX Crew 5 mission launched early Thursday morning. What's the aim of the mission?
So this is becoming quite regular for SpaceX now. They're doing these 5 to 6 month rotations on behalf of NASA. So where they send astronauts up, they do experiments, conduct operations on the International Space Station. Which makes this one quite interesting is this is the first time, firstly, a Native American woman is going into space, the commander of the capsule, and somewhat quite important for nowadays, there's a Russian cosmonaut on board. So in the past, a lot of these missions, these kind of stays have been taking Americans, Russians, and a few other countries together. Now, obviously, with the war in Ukraine, tensions have been high even in space. And we've seen Americans still going with the Russians on the Russian capsule, but this is the first time a Russian has gone on the SpaceX capsule. And so, even with all the tensions on board, they're still finding ways of cooperating in space and advancing their cooperation in space. And so, this both puts forth the research and science interests of not just the US, but Japan with that Japanese astronaut and Russia on board. So it's as much a good sign for science as it is international peace and diplomacy.
Good to hear. Brad Tucker, we do have to leave it there. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon.
Take care.